For this review I'll be taking a look at Brian De Palma's 1993 film Carlito's Way. It's not the best 4K image quality you're ever going to see, but it is still very good, and an impressive representation of the film as I originally saw it at the Empire Leicester Square in January 1994. Digital theatre system sound had only recently been introduced to cinemas when Carlito's Way was released, and when initially released it was on film but with sound run in sync on disc, just like these. They're CDs, but they're special CDs and won't play in a CD player. You need a specific DTS reader to get the 5.1 sound off of discs such as these. The sound, I thought, in the cinema matched the imagery perfectly, and I'm running 5.1 in here, but the sound has been reworked to DTS-X, so for those of you with overhead channels, you'll probably find even more subtle imagery in the audio when watching this film. But I thought it worked extremely well with the film in here, as it did back in January '94 when we saw it at the Empire. The 4K disc is again superior to the Blu-ray due to HDR, and on Carlito's Way it's HDR10+. The Blu-ray looks to me like a previous cine transfer from a low contrast print and does not have the filmic colour saturation and density of the 4K. The aspect ratio is approximately 2.35-2.40 to 1, and it has a nice natural filmic look to it. If you look carefully, you can thankfully see some film grain, which is nice. It's not too coarse. However, if you look at the making of, which is on both the Blu-ray and the 4K disc, you'll see what must have been an earlier transfer, and I suspect it was an early scan for a DVD, and if you look at that on a big screen you will see a really coarse grain effect. So I suppose these image noise reductions that have been developed over the years are now doing much more subtle work than they were when this film was released on DVD. It was actually a week after opening night here in the UK that we went to see Carlito's Way at the Empire, and I remember really enjoying it. I could actually remember quite a lot of the film, which isn't bad when you consider it was 29 years ago. Overall, I think I have just one criticism, and that's the continuity. Because this is a character-driven piece, there's a lot of exposition through dialogue, a lot of conversations, and Brian De Palma, of course, likes to use multiple cameras for these, as most directors do, and you're cutting from one angle to the other, and you can tell the characters are in different positions, their arms, their hands. Their faces are looking the wrong way to where they were in the previous cut. So that's the one criticism I have of this. It does get better as the film goes on, but it did distract me somewhat. And I don't recall it distracting me in the cinema, so maybe the big screen rather fooled me and I didn't spot things. But in here, with not quite such a big screen as the Empire Leicester Square, it was all too obvious, and I suspect on a television it will be even more obvious. So that's the one criticism out of the way. Now, screenwriter David Coep, I think he had a eureka moment when he suddenly realised that the way to make this film was to have the ending at the beginning, and that really is what makes it, because then we have a running narrative throughout from Al Pacino, completely in character, and it really does give this film something special. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I really like it, and that was how I felt back in 1994, and it's how I still feel now. It has a humanity to it, and it's not an all-action film. You're watching, as I said, a character-driven movie, and it really does work. You feel like the 2 hours and 24 minutes have gone by in 90 minutes, and for me, that's the sign of a good film, and I do think this is a very good film. Now, I know the critics didn't hold it in very high regard when it was first out, but I think there were some reasons for that. I believe Al Pacino had just won an Oscar. There were a few other things, and it was time to give him and the others a bit of a kicking, but they got this one wrong. I think it's a very good film, and it may actually be better than Heat. See what you think. I think I prefer it to Heat. I could do with watching that film again, I suspect, but one thing I will say about Carlito's Way, it's certainly not as dark as Heat. Now, the film that this is going to always be compared to is Scarface, another one directed by Brian De Palma and starring Al Pacino, but I don't get the similarities between those two films. I think the films of Brian De Palma this is most influenced by is The Untouchables. The music in that and the way it was shot, the whole feel of it, even though it's set in a previous gangster era, it has that sort of feel to it and the sort of look. But an earlier film, 1980 I believe it was, Dressed to Kill, there's a sequence in that where Nancy Allen's character is chased onto a subway train, and we have something very similar in this with Al Pacino being chased onto a subway train. So there's some similarities there, but also the suspense of Dressed to Kill, I felt that was very similar to Carlito's Way, and if you look at both those films I think you too will see the Brian De Palma hallmarks that make him the great director that he is. I think the whole cast in this is really good, and I suppose they should be really because they're all top-notch actors and actresses, but Sean Penn and Penelope Ann Miller, they really do complement Al Pacino perfectly. You'll spot Viggo Mortensen in this too, and there's a few others that are rather big names today. But there is some bad language, there's some violence, there's some sexual nudity, and worst of all for me, there's some drug taking, and I really don't like that sort of thing. But as long as you know what to expect, I think you should see this for the really good film it is, if you haven't seen it already. I found myself, thanks to the acting, completely wrapped up in the whole story, and as I said, that running time just shot past. Towards the end, perhaps keep a lookout for what must be the longest escalator ride in history, as Al Pacino is running and fighting for his life. But apart from that and the continuity issues I mentioned earlier, there is much to admire in this film. Not only is the score excellent and totally suitable to the imagery on screen, but when we go into the nightclubs and the discos and you get the surround sound of the disco tracks, that really does make you feel like you're physically in those clubs. It really does have a good atmosphere to it. And with this disc being so good, it did make me feel at times like I was back at the Empire Leicester Square, the most spectacular cinema in the world, before that beautiful massive auditorium was sadly split into two. I used to love seeing films there back in the heyday, before the downturn in image quality at cinemas really started to bite in the early 2000s. And in that regard, I expect that my next review will be Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, which is what really made me sit up and take notice of THX sound, which is of course one of the things that the Empire was famous for, and that's the film that made me go out, or rather save up, in order to go out and get a THX Ultra system for the home. So if all goes to plan, more on that next time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing, so I'll be encouraged to carry on creating content like this in the future. Until the next video, bye bye for now.